Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. A child's sleep cycle is an important part of keeping them healthy. There's a lot more research as to different durations each age group should be getting a night. Today, we're looking at the reasons why your teenager may be having problems sleeping. And there is more of a reason than they're just playing video games to odd hours of the night. It gets a lot deeper than that. So our guest today aims to improve the lives of adolescents through its environment and believes in promoting positive peer relationships throughout. He is currently a professor in psychology at the University of Nebraska. Dr. Jonathan Santo, thank you so much for joining me, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great having you on. I think the focus of your research is so incredible. The fact that I can easily get down into a rabbit hole throughout the topics is such an amazing aspect of looking at the different problems, different issues, not just teenagers have, but how it leads into adulthood as well. It probably describes a lot of the reasons why I have trouble sleeping. Let me just be honest there.
And that's fair. And I think really the part about this research is that it's very relatable to most people. We've all experienced issues, difficulties relating with our peers. We've all had nights where we had trouble falling asleep. And so, yeah, I think this is the kind of stuff that resonates with a lot of people.
Now, a lot of your focus has been on peer relationships and the changes between young adulthood and adulthood, which we'll definitely get into describing soon. But what sort of inspired you to have this focus of research?
Yeah, this is a fun question because it was entirely based on my advisor during grad school. I happened to have taken a developmental psychology class that he was teaching. He studies peer relationships, and the way he described the importance of friendships and the challenges that adolescents go through in navigating the ins and outs of being liked by their peers, he put it in such a way that it was impossible not to find that very contagious. And from then, I was really just interested in really better understanding what affordances that friendships provide, the challenges of being victimized by one's peers, and the effects that it has.
And it's an incredible piece of research. Why do you think that this is not something that a lot of parents are sort of aware of as to the deeper reasons as to why sleep is, as child sleep is affected?
Yeah, to answer this, I'm going to talk about my life and my kids, because I think a lot of it has to do with the day-to-day experiences of being a parent. And so I have an 18-year-old right now, and I can hear him playing video games with his friends while I'm trying to go to sleep. And I think it's a topic that impacts parents in the home in the evenings, but of course it's not something that is just restricted to that period of the day, and in fact it's a reflection of the entire day overall. And I think this is where the challenges that they have with their peers also plays a factor.
And thank you so much for having that great introduction to our topic today. Before we get started and get deeper into the hard questions, I love to start off with a little bit of a quick fire, easy question round to hopefully get to know you and some of your interests as well.
Great, I'm ready.
So the first question is, do you have a favorite book that you could share with us?
Yeah, I thought about this quite a lot. There's a few books I've read recently that I'm absolutely in love with, but when I had to choose a favorite, The Lord of the Rings, I've read it once a year, every year for I think 15 years in a row. I will live and die by being a Lord of the Rings nerd. And so that is my final answer.
And I have to say that is a great answer. Coming from New Zealand as well, where exactly where it was filmed is such an amazing treat. I'm always sad every time I go back to New Zealand to visit family that I don't get to go to see the sets. But my sister has recently bought all the book series, and she's reading a lot of the aspects that they don't really show in the movie, and she's listing them all out as to like, they don't show this, they don't show this relationship, they don't show this friendship that could blossom. And so there's a huge huge revelation for her whenever she's finding new aspects to it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We were arguing in our household just last weekend about Tom Bombadil and the fact that he wasn't included in the movies. But let's save that for probably the next podcast we have together.
Oh, yes, for sure. Now, what movie have you recently enjoyed that you'd like to share with us?
And this one is very much on brand. I absolutely love the recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that came out, Mutant Mayhem. I went to see it twice in the movie theater. I think it just beautifully captures adolescence, the years of 14, 15, 16. And I think they did a just fantastic job with it.
Yeah, that was a really great movie. It's different to the Megan Fox version that they had. I think the aspect of focus on teenagehood and the fact that these turtles, it's like a huge metaphor for what a lot of kids are feeling, that they miss out on sort of the teenage aspect to when they sort of focus on something of being an adult so much, they sort of forget about being a kid. So it's a huge metaphor to that. And I think I read a research article on that, which is why I can easily talk about it. But it was a very interesting sort of variation compared to teenagehood versus adulthood.
Right. Yeah, no, and I love that they all had, the types of interests, and they talked the way adolescents do, and it didn't feel like I was watching a very dark, dramatic movie. It was a nice reflection of these teenagers figuring things out for themselves.
Yes, I couldn't actually agree more. Now, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment that is definitely on brand for you and what your interests are?
Not me personally, but in my household, we listen to the Midas Touch, I think the Midas Network. It's a legal blog. It's basically on in the background in my house almost all the time. And I find, if you told me as a 15-year-old, oh, by the way, one day you're going to be obsessed about a legal podcast, I would have told you that was crazy, but it's actually fascinating. And of course, in American politics right now, there's a lot going on. So it's not surprising that there's some lots of people who have things to say about that.
Legal podcasts are interesting. True crime is probably where I'm at the moment. So I haven't really got in deeper into the politics part and the legal part to it. But definitely the actual murder part of happening is very on brand for what I'm interested in at the moment. So maybe in a few years, I can definitely see myself going to legal aspects to it.
And I would love to get into a true crime podcast. I'm a huge fan of Only Murders in the Building, the TV show that's centered around listening to a true crimes podcast, and the way in which the characters are so into it. So I think I'd like to experience that.
Yeah, no, I actually, it's a amazing aspect to sort of show the effects that true crime podcasts really have on society as well, like the grip hold that it has. And I think it's just gotten more intense with all the other stuff that's happening around the world. There's a lot of like true crime interests that nerd buffs that sort of come in, and it's a really interesting conversation that I think a lot of my friends always have.
Love.
Now, in your professional, even your personal life, do you have a person that you find yourself looking up to?
Yeah, and this is absolutely, I thought about this one a lot too. Frederick Banting is my go-to person for someone who I look up to as a role model. And I don't know if this is someone that a lot of people are familiar with.
I'm not sure. How would he be a role model to you?
Well, Frederick Banting is a Canadian medical doctor famous for having isolated the compound of insulin in the treatment of diabetes, and the youngest person to have received the Nobel Prize in medicine. And my favorite detail and why I feel like he's such a role model is because he made such a powerful impact on the world. But the most important detail is that he sold the patent for insulin for $1 because he believed that this was such an important discovery, everyone should benefit from it. And if that's not a role model, I don't know what would be.
Yeah, I feel like society could never do that today. Just existing costs probably about 10 grand a year, or probably half a year even. But I think the idea of, I can definitely see why he is a huge role model for you, because there's a whole idea of just living should be a benefit to everyone. Just be able to exist without the fear of, oh, it's going to make I'm going to be homeless. I'm not going to have to do that. That's such a great way of being someone who actually cares about helping people rather than just cares about the money aspect to it.
Yeah, and I think in terms of scientific research, making the benefits available to everyone, I mean, yeah, for the benefit of humanity as a whole, we should all strive for that.
So thank you so much for answering those quickfire questions. And I hope that you're as warmed up as I am to answer some of the harder questions that we're going to be looking at today.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Now, I know that everyone has a very different definition as to what parenting is and what it involves to be a parent. Either in your professional or even your personal life, do you have a definition for parenting that you could share with us?
Yeah, my definition really boils down to the transition from being a person's entire life to essentially letting that person become their own individual in the world, that you get to have connections with them, but you're not directly impacting them the way you once were. And I think that process is a challenge. You go from a complete responsibility to essentially letting your kid go off into the world. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges of being a parent, because it is that foundational component of the process.
So it's kind of like inspiring a child, but also letting them have their own idea of what it is to be a human in the world, or what it is to exist within society.
And I mean, especially right now, giving them the tools that you think helped you become an adult, but may not necessarily be the tools that they need for the current climate that they happen to be diving into. And so it's definitely a give and take, and it's probably a huge challenge about being a parent.
And what do you think expectant parents should be aware of throughout their transition into being a parent? So if you could say to yourself a little bit earlier, during your child's, right when that sort of started, what would your message be? What would your advice be?
And this is terrible advice to hear from a developmental psychologist, and I'm going to be completely honest about how naive I was. But I honestly, when I had kids, I honestly thought, after the age of 3 and 4, I'm not going to worry about them so much anymore. Now that they're going to be able to be reasoned with, you can talk to them, you can explain to them why something is better than another. I thought, okay, I'm going to stop worrying about them at that point. And I'm now realizing, no, it never stops. And I wish someone had really reinforced that to me when I was 25, 26 and starting to have kids.
Yeah, that is a great sort of way of thinking. I think definitely that a lot of parents are sort of at that aspect as well, when it's sort of like, I know a lot of my friends, they are really much focused of, okay, I can actually talk with my child now. I can actually sort of describe. And then when it comes to that situation of them throwing a tantrum and then trying to rationalize with a toddler, there is no rationalizing with them. There is, I need this now, or we're just going to go home, or I'm just going to throw a fit in the middle of a supermarket. There's no need to, okay, I think the only thing that they found out that works is bribery, which is probably what they use, I think, 90% of the time.
That's funny. But hey, if it gets results, who's to argue?
Exactly. I mean, it makes them stop crying in the middle of a shopping center. That's great. Now, a lot of our focus today is on the adolescent stage in life. And I think we're going to be talking about a lot of the different cycles, a lot of different issues that come in when it comes to adolescence, and trying to get them to sleep and trying to make sure that they are having sufficient enough of sleep, I think, is the main thing a lot of parents are having trouble with when it comes to teenagers. So when I say adolescent sleep problems, what exactly would that be entailing?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that question really falls on the issue of adolescence, because when you're dealing with a toddler, when you've got a baby, you put them down to sleep for X amount of time, and it's sort of expected that that's going to be that period of this when they don't really have much of a choice in the matter. But lo and behold, with adolescents, send them to their room at night. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go to sleep. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get 8 hours, and you don't necessarily have full control over what's going to happen. And if that weren't complicated enough, they don't have control over it themselves all the time. Their sleep patterns are changing. They might be dealing with issues that they encounter in their day-to-day lives where, try as they might want to go to sleep, but they can't. And so it becomes that much more complicated where it wasn't before.
Mm-hmm. And how do hormonal changes sort of play a little part in the adolescent issue that when it comes to going to sleep?
And that's a great question, because there's not a ton of examples in which you can point to hormones having a direct impact on someone's behavior in adolescence, except in the example of with sleep, because one hormone, in particular melatonin, is actually secreted later, about 2 to 3 hours later among adolescents, which is heavily implicated in the sleep-wake cycle and helping us fall asleep. And so just the fact that that hormone alone is being secreted that much later plays a factor in why adolescents you see this shift in how much they want to go to sleep at a later time than they did when they were 13, 14.
Mm-hmm. And especially when it comes to, I think from my experience when I was growing up, and I know when it comes to my sister growing up as well, there's that understanding of there's a little bit more peace and quiet when everyone else is asleep as well. I think the idea of, okay, you can just sort of be whoever you want to be in your room and just not have a lot of the attention really focused, a lot of being told what to do. I think there's a lot of, when it comes to those factors, and as well as to why some children, some teenagers really may prefer to stay up a little bit later than being told to, as long as they stay in their room as well. And I think that's what my parents sort of did when I was growing up, was the fact that as long as they're in their room, then that's okay, because they'll eventually fall asleep. There was no, I think they realized by the time I was about 16, there was no bedtime that I was ever going to follow. There's no idea that I'm just going to stay in bed and go to sleep the entire time, but because there's going to be a chance that I'm going to want to read a book or play a game and do something. But as long as I was in my room, there's a huge difference of, okay, she's in there, she's okay, she's at home, just she's eventually going to fall asleep, and then she'll slowly learn herself why things aren't working.
Oh, for sure. And I think one thing that it's easy to forget as an adult is just how much freedom we have over our lives compared to adolescents, who have to get up at a certain time, have to be in a place for sometimes 8 hours or more, and then have other activities that they have to do, be it sports, be it homework, and then spend time with their families for dinner. And it's that time at the end of the night when they are in their rooms is their time, and it's hard not to feel like that's their chance to do the things that they get to decide for.
So now a lot of what we're talking about today is based on an article that piqued my interest and some of my team's interest as well when it comes to some reasons why children and adolescents may have trouble sleeping. And it is an article that you wrote sort of connecting the idea of bullying and victimization, and that has a problem on a child's sleeping patterns or the inability for a child to fall asleep. Why is that even considered a factor in some research today?
That's a great question, and one that is central to what we were trying to do with that paper. And it boils down to the fact that the impact of negative experiences with one's peers on adolescence during a period of the lifespan where peers take on a much more important role ends up being very pervasive. These impacts shape their relationships in school, but also outside of school, and as we can see, into even their attempts to fall asleep. And it turns out that there are a variety of psychological and physiological manifestations of these types of negative peer experiences. And one of them is difficulty sleeping.
Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot more to bullying that sort of piques an interest. When it comes to bullying as well, it can be cyberbullying, it can be face-to-face bullying as well. Why do teenagers maybe not see the fact that coming home is sort of like a peaceful place for them? I think a lot of parents, when they say, okay, the home is a safe space for a child. However, if they're having trouble sleeping, they may not feel like the home is a safe space. So why is that sort of a disconnect between what a parent may think and what a child may perceive it as?
Yeah, and I think it's perhaps idyllic to think that life works that way. But I think when we've had a bad day at work, it certainly doesn't stop the second we go through our into our house. And I think it's the same thing for adolescents. And you gave a fantastic example in cyberbullying and cyber victimization, in that has an impact on adolescents outside of the school environment. So they can be in their rooms on their phones and seeing that someone's posted something nasty about them, or revisit something that happened over the course of the day, and it as a result impacts how they feel about themselves, and also whether or not they're going to be able to sort of calm down and be able to fall asleep eventually.
Mhm. No, that's a very good point. There's, I think, a lot of another disconnect that I sort of wanted to address when it comes to parents not really knowing whether your child is being bullied. And I think that's a huge indicator as to the sleep problems. What are some other signs that sort of connecting between a parent sort of noticing the fact that the child is going through more than just, oh, having trouble sleeping, that can lead to the aspect of bullying as well?
Yeah, and this is really hard because I really feel for children and adolescents who are having trouble feeling embarrassed about what's happening to them at school, not necessarily wanting to talk to their parents about it. Sometimes for very pragmatic reasons. I mean, what if the answer to the situation is your parents suggest you change schools? What if the response to being bullied through social media is to take away their phone, which is one of the most useful tools they have to connect with those that they are friends with? It's very scary, I think, for an adolescent to think as to how to navigate this, and especially sort of how to manage dealing with their parents' reaction to all this, because I'm sure that they're dealing with the challenge of how am I supposed to deal with this in the school setting alone. That's just added on top of that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think a lot of when it comes to parents as well, I think from my experience with how my mom used to deal with bullying that happened in my school, is the fact that she would storm the office the minute that there was even a sense that it was happening. And that's grew my fear of telling her as well, for the fact that, okay, her reactions are going to be one of the biggest issues. And that can also add to the negative experience that a child will have with the rest of their peers as well.
Right, and this is sad because the person who's doing the victimization is causing the problem here. But to address it, someone has to create a bigger problem, inform the school, talk to school officials, find out what's getting at the bottom of it, and it would feel like this is just making things worse before they're ever making things better. And I think it is one of the cruel realities of these problems are very unlikely to just disappear on their own, but anything you do in result of it is going to make more problems in the short term.
Yes, no, it's a very complicated way of sort of going through it as well, because you want it to be solved, but you also don't want to rock the boat. You also don't want to make it even more of a mess that you're going to have to clear up and also be blamed for even addressing the situation. Now, when it comes to those factors, how can awareness of these little issues lead to a better solution amongst families and schools?
I think to answer that question, it really boils down to communication and an open dialogue that adolescents can have with their parents and their parents can have with their adolescents. That's really hard to maintain. I mean, I don't know of any parent who's been able to just navigate that process completely seamlessly throughout their entire child's adolescence. It's a challenge. It's something in which you learn how to deal with them. They're learning how to deal with you. And so it may not necessarily work all the time, but if those sources of dialogue can remain open, I think that there's always somewhere that it can go and be improved on from there. I think it's when one person doesn't feel comfortable talking about it at all that there's not really anything that can be done. Parents can't force their children to talk to them about issues that they don't want to talk about it. And I don't think there's much that can be done about that.
Yeah, I think communication is the biggest thing, but there has to be that trust within the relationship, within the parent and the child, to sort of allow the child to feel like they can open up. And I think that's where I think a lot of parents sort of fall. It's like they want to build the child's autonomy, but they also want to protect the child at all costs. And that becomes a huge issue. And I think we spoke about that a little bit earlier as well when it comes to the balance between guiding and allowing the child to make mistakes on their own.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I've got a teenager still, and I'm still figuring it out. So the second I've got that all sorted out, I'd gladly come back.
You can write a book about it and tell us exactly what you've learned.
Oh, my kids would love that.
So what changes that parents can do to create a home environment that promotes sort of that better sleep for adolescents and sort of allowing them to make it feel a bit more comfortable in the space?
I think sleep hygiene tends to be a factor that everyone agrees is hugely important in developing healthy sleep habits, really making an environment in which the bedroom is a place to relax, that the environment is calm and quiet, that there's not a ton of light or loud noises, and that a schedule is maintained so that it's not varying from day to day, but instead actually staying relatively stable. Even, I hate to say it, during the weekends when there's no reason an adolescent should have to get up early, but getting up late, sleeping in is definitely going to disrupt that sleep-wake cycle and just going to make Monday morning that much more difficult as a result.
Oh God, I think every teenager is going to hate to hear that.
Exactly. And I don't think there's anyone, I mean, in our household, still some of the adults want to sleep in on the weekends. And I think it's nice to know that at least it doesn't end in adolescence.
Yes, no, I just reached 26. So now I'm very much still in that sleeping habit of I'll wake up at 10 o'clock. It's fine.
Exactly.
Now, as adolescents sort of strive for that independence and the sense of autonomy in them as well, how can parents gradually empower them to sort of take responsibility for their own sleeping habits while also allowing them to be aware of the effects if they don't get enough sleep?
Yeah, and I think it's hard for parents because a parent wants their child to succeed in school, and that's probably one of the most obvious metrics that of how is my kid doing? Are they getting up in time to go to school? Are they not falling asleep in class? Are they doing reasonably well academically? And it's I think very easy to look at that as the end all and be all, but really you said it. At the end of the day, this is something that a person develops into adulthood to manage their own sleep-wake schedule. And so with my adolescent, there have been some times where he stayed up way too late and had to get up early in the morning to go to work, and he regretted it. And I think that's a learning process. And I've been there too. And I, as we were joking about before, it took a while to learn that too. There were tons of time where future John was upset at past John.
Yes, I am currently in that stage of, okay, I can sleep 4 hours if I need to wake up at like 6:30. Okay, I can go to sleep by 12 and still get up in like 4 hours in order to leave. So it's a very big thing. And I think it really stems from not just childhood, not just my adolescence, but also the idea of, okay, I need to be in places, but I also want to balance, enjoy some of the nighttime as well. And some of the night rituals that I have is staying up while everyone else is asleep, just sort of enjoying that little peaceful moment, especially if you live in a household where everyone is always rushing, everyone is always trying to do their own thing and trying to get you to do things as well. I can definitely see from the child side of the impact. I still haven't learned the adult side's argument yet because I don't really want to listen to that at this point in my life. But I can tell that there's going to be some changes that as you get older, you sort of learn those mistakes and learn to do it. Right now, university is not helping with that idea, but I think eventually it will come through. And hopefully, I think a lot of adolescents will learn in their own time as well. I think there's a huge point in doing that. And I'm definitely not a parent, so I definitely can't say the parent's argument to it. So that's why I'm sort of a little bit more focused on the teenager side. Now, when it comes to some of the sleeping problems that can get a little bit too much, though, to an extent where they're not sleeping at all, and that could be for a myriad of different reasons, including the bullying aspect to it, when should parents try and consider seeking out a therapist or someone to sort of help them figure out the deeper meaning within them not being able to sleep?
Yeah, and this is as a researcher, I'm gonna give the advice that I've heard from others, and that when it has an impact on their day-to-day lives in whatever way that expresses itself, and it could be that the adolescent themselves is saying, "Hey, this is a real problem. I haven't slept well in the last 3 days. Maybe we need to talk to someone." And it could involve, like you said, talking to a therapist, talking to a medical doctor, a general practitioner to find out what might be going on here, for the simple reason that there could be a lot of aspects all interacting to interfere with a person's ability to fall asleep or to stay asleep or to not wake up too early.
Yes, I think there's a huge idea of the fact that therapists aren't there until the very last resort. But I think from what you're saying, from what I'm assuming, is the fact that as long as you get it as early as you can, I think would maybe help a little bit. So if you sort of notice, if a parent is sort of noticing it as a continual habit within like a few weeks, then maybe that's the time to sort of go and at least seek out some kind of advice.
Yeah, I agree. I think um, the way I like to think about it is sleep health is like everything else regarding our health. If we had a toothache, we wouldn't wait until it became unbearable. We'd want to talk to someone and get it addressed as soon as possible. Similarly, the way in which adolescents can think about their sleep habits is like how they would handle the other issues regarding their health. They brush their teeth, they wear their seatbelt while they're in the car. It's just one of those things that you do just because it's the healthy thing to do. And just like you said, when things don't go as well, that's something to realize that, okay, this is something that maybe I need some help addressing.
Okay, perfect. And this leads us really well into the next part of our show, which is the practice and habit. Now, this is some of your own practices that you do to sort of go through everyday life on a day-to-day basis. Now, what is practice that you do to remain present when life gets a little bit too stressful?
Yeah, and for me, one of my biggest stresses is my students' defenses as part of their process in the graduate program. I worry about them succeeding. And so usually the night before a student has a defense, I'm pretty anxious about what are the type of questions that are going to come up, what issues are we going to have to deal with. And one thing that always helps me to center myself is to think about meal planning for my family. So I do all the cooking in our household. I absolutely love planning out a week's worth of meals, varying the flavors, varying the varying the meals specifically to tailor to different people's preferences. And the second I start thinking about all this stuff, about what I need to pick up at the grocery store, what I'm going to take out of the freezer when, that's an element of my life that I have control over. And it really makes me feel like, okay, the rest will work itself out. Worrying about this won't help, but at least planning out my meals will make my life easier later.
That is such a great productive habit, honestly. That is a great way of remaining present that sort of benefits yourself, benefits your health as well. It also benefits the rest of your family, making sure that they are eating as well. And I think that's such a great response to the question, rather than, I think I have a lot of guests who come on and say things that they do personally, such as like when it comes to meditation, gratitude, which I think is just as important. But I think making sure that everyone is eating right is also kind of a great way of making sure that you're going to be okay, making sure that if life gets a little bit too difficult, at least you know that you know what you're going to be eating, you know that you're going to have sustenance that's sort of be able to sustain you. And I think that's such a great practice to have on the daily. And it's such a big motivation. I think I told you before we started recording that I am definitely not the best cook, but I'm a better baker than anything. So there is a huge difference. So if you substitute cooking and baking, I think that's exactly how it would be for me.
Oh, for sure. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, this weekend I made some muffins, and it's great when my 18-year-old comes downstairs and he wants to grab a reasonably healthy muffin as opposed to, some chocolates or anything like that. That's one tiny little thing that okay, I know at least he's eating something that's not processed. At least one thing today.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's a great balance of the autonomy and also making sure that you are guiding them to eat healthier. I think that's such a great way, like the fact that they're choosing it as well, rather than being like, okay, I'm going to choose this over what you made, because they are still having that autonomy and the choice, but you're still guiding them to a better, healthy option. It's such a sneaky way of parenting, I will say.
I'm not going to lie to you. It doesn't really work most of the time. I was the exact same age when I was the exact same way when I was his age. All I wanted to eat is junk food. But here I am later, criticizing him for wanting to only eat junk food the way I did. But let's take it as I'm brilliant.
Yeah, there you go. It's a sneaky way of be a better parent, which is another great advice as well. Now, what are some of the challenges that you face while going through the practice of trying to plan out the meals and trying to remain present at the same time?
Oh, I think just this day-to-day challenges are impossible, or almost impossible, to sort of keep from the forefront of your mind. And so I'm very fortunate as a university professor. Most of my life is entirely within my control. But that's not to say that problems don't come up, issues don't, car problems, how are you going to deal with this and that kind of stuff. So I think it's really difficult when the problems you're facing are right there in your face, because then it's really difficult to see the rest of the forest for the trees at that point. This is something I'm still working on, is in the moment trying to just take a step back and realize that, this is a hiccup, and we'll figure it out. And I've figured out all the other problems that I've encountered in my life so far. This is just going to be another one.
That it's a great way of sort of balancing yourself as a professional, but also as a person as well. I think as a professional, I think a lot of people, when they see a lecturer as well, they see as everything is perfect, everything is great. But in reality, it's like there's still that human aspect to it as well that I think a lot of people really forget. And I think it's such a great way of sharing that with us today. So thank you so much for opening up to us about that. And I think that's such a great challenge to have. Now, how do you think that this practice has impacted your home or impacted your perception as to how life really goes?
Ooh, I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. I think, this really sort of, now we might be going a little off topic, but does tie into the division of labor that happens in a household between, parents who are co-parenting while working. And this is one of those situations where my wife does not want to do any of that, worrying about what the grocery shopping or the cooking. And because I love it, this is an easy balance, an easy thing to shift from one to the other. And it's part of that that negotiation that happens in a household, that everyone sort of plays a role. Everyone's doing a little something to help out. And if you can be doing something that helps out the family that you actually legitimately enjoy or you don't actively hate, why don't we set it up that way? And so this is just dumb luck that at least someone in our household likes to cook.
That is very fortunate. I think in my household, it's a very different story. I don't think any of us like to cook. But I think there is a great story within that of the division of labor. And I think that's something that we don't really see that often. And it's a great way to analyze it and be like, okay, this is where it can go right, where everything is divided equally, where everything is not just put on one side over the other. There is that whole idea of both sides really having an opportunity to also have an interest within the household that is not just making money and go home. There's not just sort of one aspect that I think is very gendered.
Yeah, which can be very easily because people fall into patterns. And it's just because, she was very honest with me. She said, if I never had to plan another meal again for the rest of my life, I would be thrilled. And I said, great.
Well, that's great to hear, and that's great that there is that example of division of labor as well within a household that is very positive and has a positive effect. So thank you.
Now, I'm not going to say that they all like what I cook every day, so that's a bone of contention sometimes. But yeah, it works. I think works more than it does.
Well, at least you're eating. I will say that. At least there's something to eat. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your own practices. This leads us really well into the open mic section of the show, and this is going to be a really interesting open mic section because we did pre-plan what we wanted to talk about as well. It's another part of your research that is an interest to you and it has now become an interest of mine and coincidentally put to that, which is the idea of self-continuity. Now, I usually have a minute or so for this, but because we're running so well on schedule, I'd love to sort of talk about this a little bit more as to what is actually, for those who don't know, the idea of self-continuity.
Yeah, and this is you're going to have to stop me at some point because I love talking about this so much. But it's this concept that I came across while I was a graduate student about research that other people were doing on this that I wasn't aware of. I did research on adolescent self-esteem, the degree to which adolescents feel positively or negatively about themselves. And we knew that that's not the end-all and be-all of how an adolescent's or any person's self-concept is shaped. There's your self-concept also reflects the way in which you describe yourself. I'm a male, I'm in my 40s. That's a part of your identity. And it turns out self-continuity is another aspect of that identity that as we go through our lives, as we change from children to adolescents to adults, we have to reconcile the way that our bodies are changing, our environment are changing, our relationships are changing into a coherent sense of self. There's I think very few of us that wake up in the morning and have no idea who we are, how we got there, and what's going on because we have a stable sense of self-continuity, that Jonathan today is in some way connected to Jonathan from yesterday and will be somehow connected to Jonathan in the future. And that turns out to be a really adaptive component of a person's identity, is that people benefit from having strong connections to their past sense of self and their future sense of self.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big aspects to it when I was looking into it is the fact that not a lot of people know how to describe themselves. And I think that's one big issue when sort of really understanding who they are, if they can't really have one or two sentences that describe who they are without using gender, without using occupation, without using a degree, just who they are as a person. And I think that's something that is very, very prevalent to understanding what self-continuity is and to understanding who oneself is being able to describe yourself. And I was sitting back as I was having this thought, and I'm like, how do I describe myself in one or two sentences that doesn't include anything to do with what I've achieved? So a lot of people base their whole life on their achievements. So sitting there and describing themselves as to who a person is without all those other elements to it is a very difficult thing to really start off with.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we don't necessarily explicitly do, but I think implicitly we do think about it. For one example, I could think of, when I was a teenager, I was really shy in new situations. And I'm realizing that as I've become more confident as an adult, that in new situations, I'm a lot more confident than I was and more gregarious as a result of it. And that process of just thinking back about what you were like before and how you're different now and what that might mean for who you will be in the future is part of that sense of identity. And so describing oneself as gregarious, shy, funny, popular, it goes beyond a person's achievements and roles that they play and speaks to the characteristics that they associate with themselves.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of things would you like adolescents to sort of be aware of in the fact that, okay, this is their current present, but soon it will be their past. Soon they have so much in the future to talk about, especially when it comes to parenting. I think a lot of parents try to say, this is not going to be all and end all. This is not where the whole world isn't going to end the minute that this situation doesn't go your way, that there's so much to look forward to. How do we as parents sort of prepare our kids for that understanding without making it seem like such a generic response?
I think those conversations can be broached by talking in a way that frames a person as a lifelong developing individual. And so talking about, I remember you when you were younger, you loved music as a 3-year-old and you're still very passionate about music now, fosters a sense that there's value in thinking about how one was in the past and how that connects to how they are now. And that is probably what drives this as a way of being mindful about one's sense of self-continuity, as opposed to just talking about what's the situation right now, what do we need to do to solve it, and really taking a more, comprehensive look at things.
Mm-hmm. So it's simply that idea of, okay, you've been through this before, such as if you have a friend-to-friend fallout and you had a friend fallout when you were younger, you sort of base a lot of that understanding as to how you experienced that when you were younger and how the situation you combated after that, the fact that you made a new friend and the fact that you were still able to make friends after you lost that one friend. And it's, from what I'm understanding, it's that idea of, okay, you'll make even more friends. You'll have that idea of, okay, this is not the only friend I'm going to have and it's the only friend I need to focus on. Whereas there could be 10,000 other friends that you make in your future self that you're not able to see just yet.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for all of us, is to not essentially, even though we're experiencing it in the moment, realize that is not it. We've had our whole lives up to now. We have a life that will continue beyond this. And to take a long view to the challenges that we're facing is probably really adaptive, because I think it puts things in perspective, but also sort of gets us out of today is bad. Yeah, today might really suck, but that doesn't necessarily mean that tomorrow is going to be that bad. Yesterday wasn't that bad. And so it really provides a sense of like a life preserver in the tumultuousness of the moment, to give a sense of what the ocean overall looks like.
Mm-hmm. And I love how simple it is as well when it comes to, it doesn't have to be when you were younger or when you're older. It could be how you were yesterday, how you are going to be tomorrow. It's very much on that idea of you don't have to look so far into the future. You don't have to look, and I think a lot of people, they say you look so different 10 years into the future. 10 years from now, you'll be in a different place. But then you forget, like, tomorrow is still a future sense. There's still like a future availability for you to do better tomorrow. You don't have to wait 10 years in order to make a difference. You can actually do something tomorrow that's going to make a slightly better you, that's going to be a different mindset, that's hopefully going to have a better understanding as to a situation than what you have as an emotional teenager, for example.
Yeah. Oh, and anything that they encounter tomorrow, the fact that they went through whatever they went through today, they'll have that much more to work with than they would have had otherwise. And so they're even more prepared than they were when they woke up today. And so that's a nice way of thinking about it.
No, it really is. And I definitely think that this is something that I think a lot of parents can definitely broach up to their children as well, in that aspect of self-continuity. Now, if people want to find out a little bit more about this type of research, are there places that they are able to go to learn more about it?
I'm hesitant to suggest my papers because I wish I had a really good example of something that anyone would be able to just pick up. There is a monograph that was published by Michael Chandler in the 90s that covers his research in adolescent development and the role of personal persistence, the way he titled Self-Continuity, that really, I mean, it's a 400-page book written by an academic who researches this, but I think it's a great resource to sort of get into this topic, because one thing that we haven't discussed is the way in which our self-continuity is shaped by the culture we live in, and the stories about our people inform who we are. And that's a huge component of self-continuity as well, beyond just the individual psychological component. And that's one of the topics that's captured really nicely in this monograph. But unfortunately, there's no real good book I could recommend.
Yeah, well, not yet. We'll wait a little bit, and there'll definitely be something in the next few years, hopefully, and maybe your name will be on the title. But thank you so much, Jonathan, for talking a lot more about this, and for hopefully answering a lot of the questions that I think a lot of parents have when it comes to not just the aspect of sleep adolescence, but also the fact that bullying has, the impact that it has on sleep problems, as well as the idea of self-continuity. I think we covered a lot of bases here today when it comes to a lot of your research, and it's great to hear that there is a lot more research coming on about the more in-depth reason of adolescents and their trouble of sleeping. I think rather than just the idea of, because they're spending too much time on their phone or their computer, or they just don't want to go to bed, or they're just being defiant on purpose. I think there's a little bit more of research basing on other reasons that sort of take place, which is great to know. And I wish that the research existed 10 years ago when my parents and I had arguments on adolescence. But thank you so much for coming on to the show and joining me for this today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Now, if anyone would like to know a little bit more about your work and maybe some of the articles that you've written, are there places that I can send them to?
Yeah, my faculty webpage has a list of every single publication, and at the bottom, there's even general interest pieces that we've written to parents, to the audience as a whole, that I feel are really readable, give a sense of the type of work that we do, and serve as a really nice introduction to all of these issues that we've been talking about today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jonathan, again for talking about this. And I hope you guys learned as much as I did when it comes to the adolescence and sleep problems and self-continuity and all these bases that we covered today. I'll see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.